Hi, welcome to Detours Understanding Acquired Brain Injury. And with us, we have our host, Colleen. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting topic and something that affects majority of people, not just with traumatic brain injury, but acquired brain injury in general. And you also see it in people with congenital brain injury too. And this condition is more of a symptom rather than an outright condition, but it does indicate acquired and congenital brain injury, and that is hydrocephalus or hydrocephalus, depending on what part of the world you come from. But it's the same thing, and basically what it is shifts and movement of cerebrospinal fluid within the brain. And there are a lot of old time kind of inappropriate names for it, but it reflects shifts in brain tissue, loss of brain tissue, and things like that. But Colleen knows quite a bit about this topic since it affects, well, her family in different ways. Colleen?
Hi. I have a 17-year-old son who has hydrocephalus. He was born with it. He was born 6 weeks prematurely. When he was born, he wasn't breathing. That was the most noticeable symptom for me. He wasn't breathing, and he was rushed off straight down to the baby care unit. I was told probably about 17 hours later, after a couple of scans, etc., that he had hydrocephalus, that there was a bleed on his brain, and that had caused this buildup of water and pressure on his brain. They kept an eye on it, kept draining it, and then eventually he was sent to Alderhay in Liverpool in the UK, and it's like one of the best. Can't fault it for childcare, brilliant. But yeah, they did surgery on him at 6 weeks, and they put in a knee-tech gravity valve. So basically, it'll empty it every time you rise down and then it sits back up, so he doesn't get too much pressure. But yeah.
So they put a shunt in, and a shunt. The purpose of a shunt is to drain, and a lot of people with brain injury of all sorts. And he did have a brain injury, which is a bleed on his brain, and this happens a lot after traumatic and basically with anoxic brain injury, which is another acquired brain injury, and we talk about this with other folks who are with us. So he had, and the reaction was that he probably had he had edema as well, which is common, as well as an anoxic insult, as well as the bleed, and that led to his hydrocephalus or hydrocephalus. And he had, now what were the effects of his?
The effects afterwards were he was very slow with his milestones. He didn't reach them at the times that he should have done. He didn't sit up. He couldn't sit up on his own at 3. We needed a special chair to help him sit up.
Right.
I had to give him injections with steroids, and he had to have air because he couldn't breathe properly on his own. Eventually, he didn't need as much care, but we had portage, it was called. And basically it's like learn through play, teach through play, and trying to teach him how to do basic stuff, grab bricks, things like that, because his hand-eye coordination was appalling. He would like to door frames all the time as a toddler. His speech was horrific. That was another thing. He couldn't get his words out. We were on the waiting list for a long time. Eventually we did get to see a speech therapist. I think he was about 7 years old. And at that point, I'd already done some research, spoke to a few speech therapists myself, and they told me what I could do to help him at home. And he only couldn't say clock properly. He couldn't pronounce clock. So at 7, that was his only fault. I was really happy with that. I'd done well. So a pat on the back, I was quite happy with that. But yeah, he didn't reach all his milestones like he should have done. I think when he got to about 10 or 11, then he started falling in line with where he should have been. Did manage to go to a mainstream school, but I know a lot of children with hydrocephalus don't manage that at all. I did get to meet a number of parents who also had children with the same condition, and yeah, it's very, very different. The effects can be so different. There was one of my friends, that son was blind and deaf because of
Mhm.
he had a grade 4 bleed. I don't think Josh was even graded, to be honest.
And um, here are the different grades of bleeds. Um, like so many other things, when it comes to acquired brain injury, there are different levels, just like diffuse axonal injury, things like that. There are different gradations. Um, so there are the different um, gradations for bleeding. And that really is what was his um, problem was the bleeding and the anoxia, the anoxic hypoxia. But the hydrocephalus reflects the problem, and that leads to loss of brain tissue throughout. And young kids, really young, tend to do worse. That's just a fact, and it's difficult um, because they're just beginning to develop, and those areas of the brain that would be dedicated to doing those milestones that you're talking about, like developmental psychologist Piaget. While I have a few problems with his stage theory, generally it is a good theory, a good like repeatedly proven, like in research there are some glitches, you might say, but um the further down you are, the harder it is, because more your brain has to like be dedicated to these things, and so you start further behind and you've got more that ladder to climb, as it were. Now here are his stages. So when you've got a young kid, they have to go through the sensory motor, they have to do the pre-operational stuff, then the concrete operations, and then finally do formal. And so they have to make up all that distance they are behind their peers, and so that's part of why it's such a problem.
Yeah, it's very,
That's why that kind of, and kids do not do as well as adults do with brain injuries of any sort. And so, but when you see hydrocephalus, that is a big old red flag. And again, in adults, you definitely do see this too. And there are different types, aren't there?
yeah, definitely.
Um, so how's he doing now?
He's 17 now. He's
Mhm.
in college. He loves music. He's got a real passion for it, and he's good at it. He's really
Mhm.
good at, you know, I'm so proud of him. He's still very awkward socially. He has a very small, select group of friends, and he sticks with them. Um, it's very rare he makes new friends.
Mhm.
He was always kind of like that. But yeah, other than the odd few sort of, we had a few moments during his childhood where there was increasing pressure and things like that, and we'd end up
Mhm.
going back to the hospital. There was this one time he had no idea who I was as a person, and he was starting to freak out. He was punching,
Mhm.
kicking his mum, and I'm trying to explain to him, I'm your mum, but
Right.
he doesn't have a clue, and he's punching and kicking, and we ended up in the hospital. And
His
my
shunt
local,
was blocked.
no, they said there was nothing wrong with him. They couldn't see anything wrong, and they kept him in a couple of nights and sent us home. But then 6 weeks later, he did it again. So I went up to Alderhay
Mhm.
Hospital with him, and they were on the verge of sending us home because there didn't seem to be an issue. And then he did it again, right in front of the surgeon. And then the surgeon scheduled I can't remember what it's called now, intracranial pressure monitoring.
Ah, yes, yes.
Yeah, and they just sort of cut a bit out, put these wires
Mhm.
in, and
Mhm.
but whatever they did, it seemed to help because it must have released some sort of pressure because it
Yes.
helped him massively. And
Um,
after that, it's okay, but he's never needed a shunt revision, so I've been really happy about that.
Usually, whenever there is like a sudden change in behavior, and this is to parents out there, usually that's what's going on. If there is a history of hydrocephalus, um, if there's a sudden change in behavior, something like what you're describing here, It is because pressure is elevated. I don't care what they say. I worked emergency for too long. What it indicates is that the shunt has become blocked, or there may be a backup or shift in fluid, and it doesn't. There is here. Here's choroid plexus. It's the interface between the circulatory system and where cerebrospinal fluid comes out. There are multiple places this happens, but this is the big one between the base ventricles here, which the lateral ventricles, and where there's an exchange of fluid. Basically, cerebrospinal fluid is a combination of the plasma portion of the blood and the this is glucose and water and sodium, and well, here's the recipe of what it is. And sometimes there are issues with the plexus here, the basically exchange point, and there may be problems with circulation. Blood vessels become constricted, vasoconstricted, blocked. There's swelling, things like that. And the reason for the shunt, which is a mechanical drain right to the stomach, and the mechanical drain, if you will, becomes blocked. There may be an infection, something else, and the docs are quick to toss you out because it's a pain in the butt, and they either have to do a revision, a change as you get older, or they may have to place an ICP monitor, which is a temporary device that is used to measure pressure. I almost ended up with a temporary device like that because I still wasn't waking up initially. And they were like, if we don't see changes. And then I started to become more combative, and, it was like I started to come out. So, but these changes in pressure are what cause the change in basically an increase in pressure, which should be zero, but a change in ICP, intracranial pressure, which is, you got three things in your head. You got brain, you got skull, you got fluid. That fluid is mostly water, non-compressible. Skull is also non-compressible. Only one thing is compressible in there. We all know what that thing is. And so that is why you'll see a sudden change in behavior, maybe aggressiveness, confusion, severe headaches. If there's sudden onset in headaches, so somebody with a shunt, they need to see their doctor, and you need to press this. Sudden, sharp, painful headaches, or long-term chronic, like migraine-ish kind of headaches, if they have a shunt, they've got to see their neurologist or neurosurgeon. And you be aggressive with that. Here's some symptoms of changes for, that when a shunt needs checking. These are like, because if that doesn't get taken care of, you can develop a herniation of the brain where it tries to force itself out through the opening at the base of the skull. Bad, very bad. It can be fatal. So yeah, if you see these, don't let them kick you out or try to push you out. Okay, it can be fatal, and it requires that when if you're an adult, it requires you to know those symptoms. So really important. Sorry for kind of hijacking this, but these are things that medically are really important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. If you see, as a parent, yeah, don't let the doctors push you out, and definitely be aggressive. Can't stress that enough. I would say if you have any symptoms with your child, call the surgeon within 4 hours, maybe less if you can, go and see one.
Go to
Yeah,
ED, go to A&E, go to ED.
Yeah.
This is not something to fool with. This could be life-threatening, potentially, especially if it's sudden, a sudden change. Anytime you see a sudden neurological change, it means there's potentially a neurosurgical emergency. Sudden changes are bad. It's suddenness.
There was always one very small thing with Joshua that I could always tell that there was pressure in his head, and his left lid used to just drop halfway, like it just drop.
Right.
And it never happened any other time. That was a symptom that nobody ever told me about, and it was something I picked up on my own.
It's unique to each individual. There will be signs and symptoms. It is a sudden change of any sort. Anything that stands out that, wait a minute, this kind of weird. It may be a blown pupil, maybe a sudden strong headache, maybe sudden confusion, aggression, dizziness, any sudden neuro symptoms. It could be a sudden behavioral symptom too. Could be
Mm.
changes in speech, could be sudden sleepiness, it could be anything sudden.
Yeah.
Sudden personality change, suddenly depressed. But suddenness is really the red flag. Now, headaches can be chronic, and a person who has a history of headaches for afterward for their neurodamage, but you know,
Yeah, it's a lot harder for younger children to spot those
oh
symptoms.
heck yes.
I found it was. I definitely found that I was more comfortable when Joshua was able to speak to me because one of the other symptoms he had was, and he had it from birth, was that he used to stop breathing several times in the night, sleep apnea.
Mhm.
That was frightening for me as a parent anyway, and I think that has partly contributed to my sleep issues now because I still don't rest 100%. I'm still always listening for
On
that moment.
alert.
Yeah, it's always there, even though, he's 17, he's grown up, he's moved out.
Right.
Well, I said moved up, but he's
Um,
older, he's moved into his bed.
um, I know that like now I never had that disorder, but I would have seizures at night.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'd be bad enough that I would go into brief respiratory arrest. And since my dad was the only one who took care of me, because my mom was unable her for other reasons, she had other medical issues. And my dad really never told my mom, and she was cognitively not able at the time. Yeah, he always said that he was always afraid something would happen at night, and I had no auras for. I did get them for my headaches, but I never got them for the seizures. And so he said it just was a nasty, nasty surprise.
Mm.
So I'm empathetic. It's like fortunately it's been a long time, knock
Yeah, he
wood,
did go out of them. I
but
was glad about that. Yeah, the sleep apnea he did grow out of, I was really chuffed to have that part of my life gone.
that is probably more likely due to the hypoxic damage and the bleeding, especially and as it puts pressure on the brainstem. And damage to those areas, they do eventually reroot if you live, long enough for
Mm.
that not to be an issue. But of course, and I can't imagine anything scarier as a parent.
Mm. Was frightening.
Um, so he's on his own, as you can see. It's like it is not a doom. You know, and like mm, it's just there are a lot of different ways, that this presents itself. The and hydrocephalus is, yeah, pardon my Americanisms. I also say aluminum instead of aluminium. Um, you know, but it, yeah, I mean, it's impressive that he's on his own because usually somebody with severe enough brain injury to express um, any of these kind of disorders. Usually they're not. Um, Usually they don't. So, do you
I
know where it expressed? I mean, was it in the lower ventricles or was it throughout?
It was in near it was there. It enlarged the ventricles. It was at the bottom of the ventricles, I believe.
Okay, so it was the lateral ventricles at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh.
Um, and like I say, he was born 6 weeks prem, but like he's doing really, really well. And I did put a
Sounds like
lot.
it.
I mean, I was his full-time carer, and because I was at home with him all day and I had nothing else to do, my only goal was to make him the best he could be and be able to cope with, what he needed to. And I'm really proud of what he achieved because he's doing amazing. You know, it's one of those nice hopeful stories that you don't hear very
Yeah,
often.
it
That
is.
he's happy and he's healthy, and that's all I wanted for him.
The other thing it shows, and I really like this too, is that there is hope. And that it shows that, like with all acquired brain injuries, which is really what it is in his case, while he may have had it, while he was, he basically had an aneurysm, is what happened. He had an aneurysm and an anoxic incident during the birth. Was this before he was born, or is this during the birth process?
They believe that my ex, his father was the violent one, was the reason behind why I went into prem labor because I took a beating.
Again, DV, I'm so sorry.
It's
So
all right.
now, is this during
Yeah,
was this during delivery, or was this triggered by
they think
like when
they think the premature birth was triggered by
yeah.
beating, and that they don't know whether the bleed was caused then or whether it was caused through the birth. They couldn't tell me.
Okay, so acquired brain injury. Yeah, that would be acquired brain injury, and also through domestic violence. So trauma to both you and we know that you have head injury from having been assaulted, which happens so often, as well as you know, virtually every, this is something we discuss on the domestic violence side, that like 40% to 44%, if I remember my numbers, but my memory's kind of sometimes not so great, of all women who have traumatic brain injury have it as a result of domestic violence. And the majority of my hosts um, have brain injury from also, I mean, not exclusively, at least most of them not exclusively, are also victims of domestic violence. Most of us have been in relationships where we've been assaulted at least once. And yes, guys do too sometimes get in relationships. Disabled men have the same ratio. And healthcare professionals, I've mentioned this a lot of times also, find themselves in relationships where people expect one thing and are hoping for a caretaker who will will take care of them, and it's not how it works. And then they get angry and they'll take a swing at you. But that's neither here nor there. I've talked about that before. But yeah, so that just adds to, and so some of your neurological injuries due to what's happened to you, and when we need to take those kind of things so seriously. I'm going to put more connections below for that. And stuff for the UK as well as the US and Australia. We've talked about that. But yeah, all these things are all interconnected.
Yeah.
Don't put up with it. It's not
Yeah.
easy to escape. It's not easy to get out. But hopefully we'll reach somebody talking about this. At least one or two.
Yeah, just one person. Who can help one person. It's a start.
Yeah, because it affects people for their lives, and many times victims of abuse, because of the damage they suffer to their brains, have problems of regulating their anger, and it then gets passed on generation to generation to generation. Many abusers were themselves smacked around, hit to the head as kids. It's not saying it's a license, but it is something to keep in mind. Disability is an explanation, not an excuse, ever, to act like a jerk, to be a criminal, which is what a person is that does that. They are a criminal and nothing else. All right. Sorry. I cannot help, but this is one of my passions. So, sorry.
Apologize.
Anyway, yeah. So, if you think your child has neurological injury, hydrocephalus, pursue it vigorously.
Definitely.
Do you have anything you feel we should know? I mean, I do want to cover this topic with you in more depth about other aspects, and we know that your daughter had meningitis, and we talked about that, and there are other videos where we talk about that. And you, of course, sepsis, very serious. Encephalitis, very serious. And we want to talk about that too. Anything else that you'd like to bring up?
Not that I can think of by this. But yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of topics that we can both discuss and help people out with.
Definitely. And again, just want to thank you. And so we'll be doing a little more coming up. And like I said, next I think we'll talk about encephalitis specifically. Would be something I'd like to talk about, the different types and encephalitis affects itself, because there's some unique symptoms and there are different ways they can express. And there's not much conversation about that yet. And
No,
it's not as frequent. No, there isn't. And you had it for how long before they put you in hospital?
6 weeks, according to my medical records, which I think is ludicrous.
It's beyond ludicrous. It's tragic. And it was doing damage while they
laughed around you. But at least I have some idea of why I have so many issues. I have an explanation. That's a good start.
Weeks with encephalitis. I still cannot wrap my head around that.
No, me neither.
Jeez. I mean,
yeah,
people want to criticize the US, and our system has a ton of flaws, mainly around how bills are paid. By the way, just as a quick note, we do not kick you out. We do not have a cash register we come in with and, hey, if you can't pay immediately, you're out of here. No. When you get to the emergency department, yeah, they may ask you for your insurance, but if you don't have, they still have to take care of you. It's the law. You have to be stabilized, and you have to be alive. And you have to, it's like they must make you stable. They must make sure. And there are many charitable hospitals in the United States, and there are most are strictly nonprofit. If you can't pay ultimately your bill, a lot of people just walk away from it. And creditors cannot use hospital credit. If you owe thousands, they cannot use that against you in your credit rating for getting a house, a car, that kind of stuff. It's illegal. So a lot of people just walk away from it, which is why, and then the hospital writes it off usually. So the scare pieces that you see on TV and the news, I wanted to quickly touch on this. They're scare pieces. A lot of people just walk away from it. You'll get bugged a lot by phone calls and things like that. They just ignore the calls. They block the numbers. The debts that you cannot get away from are two in this country. School debt, although they're working on trying to change that. And most important of all, child support debt. Guys, that is a debt you cannot walk away from, nor should you be allowed to. If you owe for kids you have, everybody can use that against you, and they should. If you owe for kids, you owe support for those kids. If you feel it's an injustice, if you feel it's not yours, then be vigorous in pursuing correcting that. But if those kids are yours, you need to pay for that. You need to support them. You should be in their lives, but I know the courts, sometimes there's some issues. If you owe for child support, you know how I feel about DV. That whole situation is complex, but it's more complicated than that, as I always say. That is the one debt that they are adamant about, and the courts will go after you for that and look for you for that. Do they, always get what they, no. But that's the one debt for which you really cannot escape. And school. For that debt, the one I'm still trapped in is I still owe for my doctorate, even though I was never able to complete it. And that's one I'll never be able to get out of that one. Even though I never could use it because I after my brain injury. So that's one that's kind of like, I don't know, I'm still paying on it, but you know. But other than that, the hospital stuff, most people just walk away from what they owe the hospital. So is it free? No, it's not. Oh, yeah. Forgive me while I do this also. People who say, oh, it's free here in Europe or wherever else. It's not free. You pay for it and everybody else pays for it in their taxes. It's just when they decide to collect them, they collect up front.
Yeah,
You
we
pay,
pay insurance.
yeah. Well, you pay for it through your taxes.
Yeah.
That's how you pay for it. And you pay for it when you're well. Not a bad idea, but let's talk to Jenny and let's talk to you about how well it works, about how well the system works, and a couple others.
Calculations I think they should make.
Yeah, exactly. That is another video. I would like to. My mom comes from Germany, and their incompetence,
Yeah,
their
my mum's just.
incompetence killed my Oma because
Oh,
they dropped her twice when transporting her, and the second one killed her, and a number of my friends too have suffered. So I don't maybe have the best opinion. Maybe I'm not the best person to ask about how good it is, but when they've injured your family members, and my mom came misdiagnosed and they overdosed her on steroids to the point that they destroyed her adrenal glands. I, sorry, I'm getting a little, but I am not impressed with socialized medicine. It's nice to be able to use other people's money to care for you, but it doesn't mean you're buying the best care. American system is mixed. We are partially socialized through Medicare, Medicaid, and TRICARE and stuff like that. I know that, but it's kind of like Germany's system in a lot of ways. Like I said, my opinion on that is, yeah. And it's like I know you have your opinions on your system too, and I know a number of angry Germans who have their opinions.
yeah, my mother's one of them.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to hear her thoughts too. We could have an interesting conversations. I'm sure she'd be willing to talk.
Oh, I'm sure she would. More than happy to.
No, I would love to have that conversation. Oh, and I need to send her something funny about the notards. Something hilarious. That's something else. And it's like I have some angry Canadians and some angry Australians. I have a very angry Australian I would like to get into a round table. So maybe we ought to all just like get together. Maybe, your mom would be willing to make some videos with me too about brain injury in the German medical system. Oh, and Utah, your friend that we were talking about.
Oh yeah, I can speak to her.
Yeah, because maybe she'd be willing to make some videos about brain injury in Germany. That would be interesting. All right. So we're gonna call it quits here. So hope you found this kind of a little bit. Hope you found it educational, interesting, and a bit surreal. Most of these things do get that way, especially if they stir the passions. All right. So if you have any questions or anything you want to know about, well, any of the stuff we talked about, and I think we've got a potential other topic now to talk about. Socialized medicine and its care for people with brain injury. And because it's important, we do have foreign viewers. And you may find it interesting. We do have people who watch from all over the world. And to find out how care is provided abroad, and maybe talking about foreign medical systems as well. Doctor education, nurse education, it's different from the United States. Very different in many countries. And so addressing that and surgery and other things like that. So Colleen, if you'd be willing, maybe we can do like a group talk about that.
Yeah. Sure.
All right. So comments below, please share those who would benefit. We're going to make sure that we have, the helpful information available for that. And so please like, subscribe, share, comments below. Bye.
Bye.